Good morning, afternoon, evening, and welcome to Concerned Citizens Presents, a new offering on Village TV. Concerned Citizens of Laguna Woods is an organization committed to peace, social justice, economic equality, and a clean environment. For the duration of the lockdown, instead of its usual 2 meetings a month, Concerned Citizens will broadcast 2 programs a month on this channel. Our programs will feature films, lectures, and debates on topics related to our mission. We hope you enjoy today's program.
Welcome to Concerned Citizens Presents. My name is Suzanne Modell, and I chair Concerned Citizens Program Committee, the committee responsible for creating these broadcasts. I am also a California native, and am pleased to bring you today a program consisting entirely of California natives. Our guest today is Vicky Espinoza. As a California native, she is dedicated to finding sustainable solutions for distributing water in our state's Central Valley. She will be interviewed by Barbara Siri, also a California native and an active member of Concerned Citizens Program Committee. Vicky Espinoza is a PhD candidate in environmental systems at the University of California, Merced. Her research focuses on the relationships between climate change, water supplies, and energy production in the Central Valley. Among her many activities, Vicky is mobilizing farm workers and small farmers to become politically active. Recent state legislation has created new agencies tasked with developing sustainable plans for managing groundwater. Vicky's goal is to assure that these plans take into account the needs of the less affluent Central Valley population, a constituency traditionally excluded from political decision-making. Welcome, Vicky Espinoza and Barbara Siri.
So hi, my name is Vicky Espinoza, and I'm a PhD candidate at UC Merced. Just a little bit about myself. I was born and raised in Los Angeles, so I'm a California native. I am a first-generation Latina in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. I am currently completing my doctoral work at UC Merced, and I received my Bachelor's of Science in Geophysical Sciences at the University of Chicago. And while I was an undergraduate, I did several internships at Argonne National Lab in Illinois, mostly focused on atmospheric sciences, where I studied climate change impacts on air quality. After undergraduate degrees, I worked for a year at Pomona College studying ocean chemistry. And another year after that, I worked at Argonne National Lab studying climate change impacts on California's hydropower. I then went on to pursue my master's degree in environmental engineering at the University of Southern California. And while I was there, I worked at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory. There, I studied climate change impacts on atmospheric rivers, which you may have heard about in your weather station. So atmospheric rivers are extreme precipitation events that could carry up to 10 to 15 Mississippi rivers of water, and they are known as rivers in the sky, and they're very important for California water supply. For my doctoral research, I'm studying the implications of groundwater management on agriculture and agricultural rural communities in California under the 2014 Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, or commonly referred to as SGMA. The new groundwater law presents some challenges in terms of leading to potential agricultural land use changes. A study by the Public Policy Institute of California, or PPIC, projected that more than 500,000 acres of agricultural land could go out of production to address groundwater overdraft issues in the state. So my doctoral research aims to address how and where land could be transitioned in a way that minimizes impacts to already underserved agricultural rural communities and small-scale farmers in the San Joaquin Valley. My work consists of 2 main components, one being a strategic alternative land use model, and a marginal, and the other is community engagement. So my overall doctoral work is based on decision-making informed beyond complex algorithms. Through this work, I am identifying the impacts and the trade-offs that result from land changes, understanding the socioeconomic and environmental impacts, and aim to ameliorate these impacts through a model that allows the exploration of land repurposing, quantification of trade-offs, for example, economic, water use, energy use, and greenhouse gas emissions, all through direct engagement with those impacted, which are communities and our small-scale farmers. This work not only explores land use changes and where they would best be implemented, but works with the constituencies that usually don't have the same policies or management strategies implemented. Again, these are underserved communities and small-scale farmers in the San Joaquin Valley. I have become aware of the inequities present in the San Joaquin Valley early on in my doctoral career and volunteered with a Community Water Center, which is a nonprofit organization that is a catalyst for community-driven water solutions through organizing, education, and advocacy in California. This opportunity was a stepping stone in engaging and learning from people in the Valley. Through hundreds of conversations with farmers and community members, I was learning that information about the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, commonly referred to as SGMA, was not reaching them due to ways of information dissemination, for example, just distributing information online, and language barriers. So having materials that are not readily available in people's native language. Since then, part of my mission during my doctoral journey has been to close this knowledge equity gap by putting my bilingual and Latino roots to good use to inform farmers, both English, Spanish, and Hmong speakers, on the potential impacts of SGMA and how SGMA could impact their livelihood. Over the past 3 years, I have organized bilingual workshops and spoken at several bilingual farmer conferences. I have also created a trilingual YouTube channel called Cali Water Ag to foster a better understanding of the science and policy behind California water and land use. There is currently a 4-part video series on the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, or SGMA, and there is a San Joaquin Valley drinking water issue series coming soon. So feel free to visit the channel on YouTube by just searching Cali Water Ag as seen on the screen or visiting the link on the screen. So now I'd like to go over an important region of California, the Sacramento and San Joaquin Delta, or as I like to call it, the heart of water in California. The Sacramento-San Joaquin Delta is formed by the Sacramento River flowing south to meet the north-flowing San Joaquin River, just south of Sacramento, where the rivers mingle with smaller tributaries and tidal flows and move out into San Francisco Bay. It is a critical hub for California's water and ecological resources. And it is a hub for the State Water Project and Federal Central Valley Project, which are critical for distributing water down south and to the valley for drinking water, municipal, industrial, and drinking water uses. So the Sacramento-San Joaquin Delta provides a portion of drinking water for 25 million Californians. The Delta estuary is the largest on the west coast of North America, and about 80% of the state's commercial fishery species are located here. At least half of its Pacific flyway migratory waterbirds rely on the region's wetlands. And it provides water to the 36 billion agricultural industry with irrigation to 4.5 million acres, a majority of agriculture located in the San Joaquin Valley. The San Joaquin Valley has been coined the fruit basket of the world, and it is recognized by its more than 400 different commodities grown in the region. The San Joaquin Valley is a drought-prone region, and there exists a poverty paradox, and there is a lot of environmental inequity present in the region. There are more than 500 underserved communities that are predominantly Latino that do not have access to safe, clean drinking water, nor healthy, affordable food. The region is also faced with critical groundwater overdraft, as you can see on this map. The orange regions are critical groundwater overdraft basins in California, and a majority of which fall within the San Joaquin Valley or the Central Valley. Overdrafted means that groundwater is being pumped faster than is being put back into the ground into our groundwater aquifers. Sigma was in part a response to the extreme to exceptional drought we had from 2012 to 2016. In these figures, you can see the progression of severity of this drought. The most extreme and exceptional drought conditions can be seen during 2014 and 2015, with the darkest red covering a majority of the state. This dry spell was broken by a wet year in 2017. Sigma is a law that aims to bring overdrafted basins to sustainable levels and restore the health of groundwater basins in California. Groundwater plays a critical role for California. California relies on groundwater for about 30% of water supply in a wet year and almost half of our water supply in a dry water year. The map on the left shows total water use in the light blue and use met by groundwater in the darker blue. Although the amount of groundwater reliance is variable throughout the state, you can see that groundwater makes up a portion of the state's water supply, especially for supporting irrigated agriculture in the Central Valley, which produces 40% of the nation's fruits, nuts, and vegetables. So what is sustainability in terms of Sigma? Well, let's talk about the six sins of Sigma. It means avoiding these 6 undesirable results, or the 6 deadly sins of Sigma. So they are lowering of water levels of rivers and streams, lowering of groundwater levels, contaminated water, sinking land or land subsidence, reducing groundwater storage, and seawater intrusion. Now, I won't go over these in detail, but it's important to mention that some of these deadly sins or undesirable results can lead to one or more of the other undesirable results or worsen their condition. Under Sigma, groundwater sustainability agencies or GSAs have been tasked with developing and implementing groundwater sustainability plans or GSPs to address groundwater overdraft throughout the state. So who can make up a groundwater sustainability agency or GSA? These are irrigation districts, water storage districts, city and county agencies. And who can participate in developing the GSP? This means giving your input and feedback in terms of what your community needs in terms of groundwater. These are mutual water companies, water corporations, and community members like yourselves, as well as farmers. If you would like to learn how to find your GSA, feel free to check out the YouTube channel, the tutorial that I have on the Cali Water Ag YouTube channel at the link on this page. So let's review the Sigma timeline. Sigma passed in 2014, and GSAs were formed by the end of October 2017. The GSPs for critically overdrafted basins, a majority of them in the San Joaquin Valley, were submitted to the Department of Water Resources, or DWR, for review in early 2022. GSAs are required to submit progress reports to the Department of Water Resources every 5 years to check progress on sustainability and make changes to management approaches if needed. Critically overdrafted basins aim to achieve groundwater sustainability by 2040, and basins in high, medium, and low priority basins aim to achieve sustainability by 2042. So unmanaged and unincorporated implementation of land following could have detrimental impacts on agricultural communities, especially underserved communities in the region. Some of the impacts of leaving land without a use or fallowed are increases in dust, which could have impacts on human health. For example, increasing asthma, valley fever, and cardiovascular disease. It could impact the economy and employment for communities that rely on agriculture for their livelihood. Now, a little bit more about underserved communities in the San Joaquin Valley. They're often referred to as disadvantaged communities, and they're defined by the California Department of Water Resources, or DWR, as communities with an annual median household income that is less than 80% of the statewide annual median household income. Severely disadvantaged communities are communities with an annual median household income less than 60% of the statewide annual median household income. Communities that are low income and predominantly people of color are disproportionately impacted by drinking water issues. So why do these unincorporated communities exist in the San Joaquin Valley? A majority of these individuals came to California looking for jobs and a new home for their families. Housing is more affordable for farm worker wages in these communities. And they're located closer to fields, so people are closer to work. And there's this perception that many unincorporated communities are full of transient workers, when in fact, these communities are a majority of folks who have been here for multiple generations and call the San Joaquin Valley home for their family and for their grandchildren. Another factor, so some of the historical disinvestment in low-income communities of color have led to the presence of these communities throughout the San Joaquin Valley and other parts of California. Some of the reasoning behind this are selective annexation, redlining, racially restrictive covenants, and racial violence. So why is this? Some of this can be explained by the way that investment follows traditional marketing incentives, where local governments choose to invest in areas that are seen to bring more economic benefit. An argument that is often used is that cities cannot take on the financial burden of investing in low-income areas because of all the work that would need to be done. But we cannot ignore the fact that racial discrimination is present and aggravates segregation and the denial of resources along race lines. Ongoing challenges in underserved unincorporated communities in the San Joaquin Valley are unsafe, affordable drinking water, substandard housing, lack of green space, parks, and community gathering spaces, and there's a presence of low quality education. There's also lack of safe transportation and infrastructure, and poor air quality, as well as polluting industries zoned nearby. So why do these problems exist? Lack of local government investments to meet the most basic needs of all communities is a reason. Barriers to civic engagement for low-income communities of color. A little bit more about barriers to civic engagement include language barriers, the time and energy costs that it takes to participate in lengthy political processes, and power dynamics such as voicing criticisms to agency members that employ family members. So linking all this back to water, specifically groundwater, most underserved unincorporated communities are served by groundwater. About 87% of community water systems in the San Joaquin Valley are dependent on groundwater, further emphasizing the need to address groundwater overdraft under the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, or SGMA, and find solutions that incorporate the needs of underserved communities. So drinking water challenges concern water quality, water supply, and unaffordable costs of drinking water in these regions. To put the drinking water issues into perspective, there are about 64,000 people in 64 underserved unincorporated communities, and they receive unsafe drinking water. During the 2012 to 2016 drought, the state received more than 2,500 domestic well failure reports, most in the Central Valley. And failing groundwater levels are likely to leave up to 12,000 more wells dry, impacting up to 127,000 people's primary source of water. Overall, there is a need to co-develop solutions for California's water issues, both in terms of water supply and water quality, with policymakers, local water agencies, and land use agencies, environmental groups, underserved communities, and small-scale farmers so that the solutions that we're creating together lead to long-term equitable water and land use management. Thank you for your time. Again, my name is Vicky Espinoza. I'm a PhD candidate at UC Merced. Feel free to ask any questions at my email on the screen, vespinoza2@ucmerced.edu, and check out my YouTube channel for more content on California water science and policy videos at Cali Water Ag.
Vicky, thank you so much. That was a really, really important presentation, and probably provided information that many of us are completely unaware of. Sue, can you tell us about how much more time we have for questions and conversation?
We have about half an hour.
Oh, full half an hour. Okay. Well, we'll see how long we feel like going, and then we can play some music if we need to. But Vicky, I really appreciated that. And having grown up in the Carquinez Straits in Martinez as a kid, that's all I heard about was, the Delta. We'd go on boat trips and, houseboat trips, etc. But I suspect many Californians don't know how large it is, how incredibly critically important it is, because as you're driving, all you see is the Sacramento River, you see the American River, you see the San Joaquin River, but you don't, unless you get an aerial view, and I think you did have one aerial picture, it almost looks like the Congo River in Africa, because there must be 20 enormous rivers that flow into that delta, from Shasta north. So it's a complex system, absolutely. And it's a multiracial system, which I'm not sure that a lot of people understand. The Hmong population, I think, migrated here, I want to say in the 60s during the Vietnam War. Can you elaborate on that a little bit? I mostly would find them around Stockton in the San Joaquin Delta, that part of the San Joaquin Delta.
Yeah, there are Hmong communities up in the northern San Joaquin area. There are also there's a large Hmong presence in the San Joaquin Valley, specifically a little bit more in Fresno County.
And when did they primarily migrate to California?
Oh, I'm not specifically sure about the date.
They came in the 1970s.
In the 1970s.
They came in the mid to late, and you see, once they start coming, once they become citizens, they can bring their close relatives. So best way to put it is they started coming in the 1970s, and they're still coming.
And are they primarily from Laos? I think, is that where the main population resides in Southeast Asia? In Laos?
Southeast Asian.
Okay.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Also historically, when you travel through like Rio Vista and all these other wonderful little towns along the Delta, there's the ancient town of Locke, which is an old Chinese settlement, isn't it? Isn't that about over 100 years old? And people are still living in those wonderful old houses.
Wow. No, I haven't been in that area, but I'll have to go check it out on my San Joaquin Valley tour adventures.
Well, I thought this was a really enlightening to see how multicultural it is. And I'm impressed that you have a trilingual website that talks about it. Backing up a little bit, I wanted to refer to one of your slides that talked about the percentage of drinking water that we take from the Delta, from groundwater, et cetera. How much though, and that's about 20%, I think, of California water for drinking water, domestic use. So does that leave about 80% of California water being used for agriculture? Is that a correct balance there? Do I have those percentages right?
Right, yes. So about 80% of usable surface water is dedicated to agriculture.
And are you including groundwater in that then too?
No, that is not including groundwater. So
okay,
that is just surface water.
More. That's just surface water that's coming right from the Delta then, right? And in the aqua, in the canals, the water canals, the cement canals.
Yes, so that's all surface water from being transported from the Delta as well as snowpack from the Sierras.
Okay, all right, not including the groundwater. So agriculture is the 500-pound canary, in the state. That's the biggest user of water in California. And referring to SIGMA, the Sustainable Groundwater Management System, which was passed a couple of years ago. So California legislature is really involved in all of this. That was not just an executive decision, was it, by Brown? The California legislature was involved in that decision. Now, the LA Times has run a few articles about SIGMA, and I don't want to make you refer to, or mention anything politically, but is this at this point a voluntary lessening of groundwater use, or is it mandatory that farmers use less groundwater?
It's mandatory that all groundwater basins address groundwater overdraft. It's not just targeting our growers, but also municipal, industry, and domestic. So anyone within a groundwater basin needs to address this groundwater overdraft, and that is being done through these groundwater sustainability agencies.
Okay, so it is mandatory. So Newsom and Brown have been just as strict as anyone in terms of mandating that shutdown or lessening of distribution. So the Kern Water Bank, for instance, towards Southern California, has that would then shut down or reduce the amount of groundwater that is accessible for towns like Merced, or Modesto. Would they be impacted by those big water banks then? And in addition to farmers?
So the thing with the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act is that it's mandatory to address groundwater overdraft, but there are different ways that each basin or each agency is addressing that overdraft or solutions to address that overdraft. Some of them are preventing further drilling of wells. Others are increasing prices of water. So there are just different ways. A lot of what is a little bit more uniform in terms of how SIGMA is addressing groundwater overdraft is through actually monitoring groundwater. We have spent decades without managing groundwater in California. And so it's been difficult to figure out how to solve groundwater issues without having data to refer to.
And we never did, because I guess we never, had a drought like we did in 2014 then, is that correct? And I guess there was a Byzantine series of contracts that farmers had that allowed them to use as much groundwater, I guess, as they wanted to, these historical grandfathered in contracts that they didn't want anybody to touch.
So the grandfathered contracts, those are dedicated to surface water.
Oh, they are just surface water.
Yes.
Okay, I didn't realize that. Thank you.
Yes.
Go ahead.
So groundwater it's called overlay. So if the land or a piece of parcel is laid over a groundwater aquifer, the person has a right to pump water out of that groundwater aquifer.
Now, of course, groundwater doesn't stay in one place. So what one farmer pumps could deprive another farmer nearby of his groundwater. It's an impossible situation to have individual contracts like that. And so is SIGMA overcoming that? Is that, designed as a solution to all these individual contracts, or are they still, in effect, those contracts?
So in terms of surface water contracts, if a grower does not have enough surface water, they will refer to groundwater to supplement whatever crop demand they have or crop water demand. So what SIGMA is doing is it's reducing the amount of pumping, but it's also allowing growers or that groundwater basin to recharge water into the aquifer to try to replenish it.
Okay, in other words, leaving it alone. Just leave it alone and hope that there's enough rain and enough snow from the watershed to recharge those areas then. So it's left by itself. Okay. Okay.
Yes, another point Irrigation districts may have surplus water, surface water, so they can use that surface water entitlement or allocation to use to recharge groundwater. And so that's what we're seeing in a lot of these groundwater sustainability plans, is taking a look at using surface water to recharge aquifers.
And do they actually sell that water back to the state, or do they just kind of donate it?
That is complicated, and that will depend on each irrigation district. But I think that a lot of that water is being sold either to a specific project or dedicated to a specific project for these agencies.
Okay, and so you feel pretty confident about Sigma then, right? As providing a real solution to California's, really, we've got some real devastation that we could be facing. So do you think that's powerful enough, a strong enough piece of legislation and cooperative, legislation among farmers?
I think that Sigma is a step in the right direction, especially in terms of starting to monitor our groundwater levels. Just because we can't really fix an issue if we don't know how severe it can be, if we don't have data to look back on or refer to.
However, and you made a reference to this, the over pumping of groundwater has caused a real has caused the land to drop in several places in the valley. Is that correct? I was
Correct.
reading where some bridges and roads are no longer usable because the land has dropped to such an extent. And there's a town also where they had to almost rebuild the town or move the town. I think it's near Merced or between Merced and Modesto, where the land dropped so much, the buildings were all unsafe. These are real physical impacts that,
Right.
Pumping of groundwater, causes for the valley. So let's move to your rural communities. And it sounds like one of the biggest issues with these small unincorporated communities is that they're unincorporated. And what would incorporating these small towns, and can you name a couple of them? Are they actual towns or are they just population centers? But would incorporating them help solve some of these issues?
Yeah, a lot of these communities that are unincorporated are smaller populations, maybe less than 1,000. But I'm trying to think of an example, but I do know that a lot of the communities, it doesn't matter how close or how far apart they are from a city, they're just not being incorporated due to either racial discrimination, redlining, and a few of the other points that I made earlier in the presentation.
Mhm.
There have been studies that have shown this discrimination for not incorporating these communities, regardless of how close or how far they are from being connected.
So they
And
have
being
wanted to become incorporated, and the local municipalities have refused to incorporate them into the water and sewage system and all of that. Then is that so? Would I find these on any map, or are they, not even listed on maps of Google Earth or anything in California?
there is a resource called the Cal EnviroScreen 3.0, and it's a resource that shows you census places, and these underserved communities are they show you actual boundaries for where these places are located. There have also been several reports on this. I can send over a report showing how some of these communities have been incorporated. So there have been a few successful cases in which communities have been incorporated to cities and clean water.
And so so it is incorporation that would solve, some of these issues that you're talking about. And is there anything a citizen can do to encourage this kind of improvement in the lives of these individuals in these communities?
Sure, if people are interested in becoming involved or helping or learning more about them, I highly recommend reaching out to environmental justice groups in the
Okay.
San Joaquin Valley. They work actually throughout California, but some of them are Leadership Council, Another one is Self-Help Enterprise and Community Water Center. So
Okay.
feel free to reach out to those and ask how you can contribute to helping these communities.
It's utterly shocking. I mean, it's like going back to early days of Cesar Chavez, that you think that these, many of them, farm workers, etc., are food insecure. You were saying they don't have enough food, or it's not healthy food, and they're surrounded by produce, and that their drinking water is not safe. I mean, that's just, utterly appalling. And it's still, after all these decades, there's still this issue, even with farm labor unions that have had some kind of control and success over the decades.
Right.
So how to account for that, except that they are isolated communities and not incorporated.
Right.
Could
Yes.
I
And
ask
a
a
lot of
question?
it has to do.
Go ahead.
Yes.
So I actually, maybe you could follow up on, I'm following up on Barbara's question. Maybe you could talk a little bit about the state of organizing among farmers. I understand when Barbara and I were young, we weren't buying grapes to support Cesar Chavez. But my understanding is that to some degree that's past history. So could you talk a little bit about what levels of organization exist in the California fields these days?
I'm not specifically sure how organizing individually among farmers is going on at the moment, but there are unions that, for example, the Farm Worker Union is one. Farm Workers Association is, I believe, the correct name for that one. So they do have resources where these unions are coming out, they're focusing a lot on safety, especially during hot weather, and making sure that regulations are being met so that there are safe conditions for our farm workers to continue producing food.
Right, and enough water in the field, enough rest time, periods to rest in shade so they're not exposed to sun the whole time. But it's still appalling that that they're food insecure. I was reading about one town called Lost Hills, and I think most of the population there, mostly Latinx, I believe, a Hispanic population, works for the Wonderful Company. I love that name. It's owned by a couple who reside in Hollywood, California. The average take-home income apparently is like $1,400. And yet renting an apartment in that town is, and I guess it's an incorporated town, takes something like 40 to 50% of their income. So one worker was saying, you either make a decision between paying your rent or eating and paying your rent, which again is not a choice that we want any of our population to make, especially our population that provides our food. So this is all still pretty depressing. One slide you mentioned, again, trying to empower these populations who are providing our food. You said there are local power dynamics, I guess, on the local water boards or the local SIGMA agencies. And it sounded like that you had to have a family member, that there was a lot of nepotism in these local water boards. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Sure. In terms of accessibility for some of these community members to participate in these agencies, local water agencies, to give input to SIGMA or any other water concern in their community, there's a lot of limitation in terms of accessibility to these meetings. So how is the information about these meetings being distributed? A majority of it is online, and there is a broadband issue in the region. A lot of people don't have internet, a computer, and only use phone for texting or limited use. So another one is language barrier. A lot of this material is in English, announcing meetings in English and not in the native language, or not providing translation devices that allow community members to understand what's going on and to give their input in terms of their concern.
And so go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, so there's just a lot of limitation in terms of how vocal community members can be. Because although there may be advertisement for, oh, we are including community voices, they're opening the doors to them, but they're not giving them the resources for them to actively participate and have a voice.
Well, is this something that you would do at UC Merced as part of, or UC Water? Is this something that you would help? And it sounds like your trilingual program is addressing that. But do you or any of your colleagues actually attend any of these meetings? And what specifically would you ask for if you do attend any of these meetings?
Sure. So I have attended a variety of these groundwater sustainability agency meetings. I have voiced that there aren't any translation devices or a translator present back before we had in-person meetings. So, and there are also these environmental justice groups that are present in these meetings as well that are voicing the concerns of community members. So they're also a great way for community members to give that information to agencies about their concerns within their community.
And so what are they asking for at these meetings? Would they ask for, how would they ask for clean water? And, what would they be asking for? How would those boards help them?
So some of the questions that I've heard have been, how does the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act help my groundwater well? Or does it impact my groundwater well? Another question has been, does it change the prices of water for me and my community? And a lot of it has been in terms of land use in and around these communities. What sort of land use can be implemented in and around these communities to help address not only groundwater overdraft issues, but also help kind of revive these communities and give them spaces, for example, parks and green space where they can go play and have recreation available to them.
Yeah, and again, it would probably come back to incorporating them, wouldn't it? So that they have access to a tax base that would, that would provide all this. Because I'm thinking if Sigma is indeed limiting groundwater pumping, that's going to have a very negative impact on these populations that have no voice, really.
Right.
So it just sounds kind of, really a whole constellation of issues that they're at the bottom rung and feeling the worst kind of impact from what we're doing in the San Joaquin Valley. Let me shift, unless you wanted to say something else about these populations that are not being heard and that need our help so badly.
Just one more point. A lot of these local agencies are required under Sigma to incorporate underserved communities and do
really?
outreach. Yes.
That's another part of Sigma then, right?
It is another part of Sigma.
Wow. How are they progressing with that then? How many have they incorporated?
I think that, well, within each GSA has its boundary and its groundwater basin to address. Some of them have done a really great job in terms of reaching out to these community members, providing information in the main languages that they speak in their native language. And there are others that may be needing some help. So it's still a work in progress. There's still a lot of work to be done, but.
Because I think you said there are 63 to 65 of these populations, right, that are not incorporated. And so we can't name any yet that have actually been incorporated and have had their water problems solved, I guess then, right? It's still too new?
There have been a few actually that were recently incorporated, and I can't think of the names at the moment, but there is a report available that was put together by UC Davis and a couple other organizations on specifically these underserved, unincorporated communities. So I'd be happy to pass that along.
I would love to know where they are, because my husband and I, even during the pandemic, took a lot of road trips, and we were always going through the San Joaquin Valley. Now, and on 99 and 5, and on many small roads, as many as we possibly could. And what was so obvious in this last trip that we took was how much land had been taken out of production. And I mean whole orchards that look like they were ripped up and just left to, to hopefully enrich the ground. So let's talk a little bit about what's actually being grown in the valley. And I think I read one statistic where California's main agricultural products, the highest is cream and milk, followed by almonds. And then row crops are way down on the list. And I think I had sent that slide that showed how much water is, is used to make one almond versus a hamburger, all of which is pretty devastatingly huge. Can you speak to that a little bit then?
Sure. Yes. So dairy is the top commodity for California, and then almonds, which is a perennial crop. And so one of the limitations with perennial crops is that they're very water intensive and they're not flexible at all. So during times of drought, we're not able to just take them out because there's a huge investment in, first of all, starting a perennial crop orchard. And another one is if they don't get the sufficient amount of water, the crop dies.
Yeah,
so they're pretty inflexible in terms of drought. In terms of annual crops, some of them can be water intensive, but not as much as perennial crops. They're more flexible because some of them are seasonal. Another thing is that they're not as lucrative as almonds. They don't produce as much economic revenue. And so that is one of the incentives that a grower has to think about. Well, do I have enough water? How much am I paying for my water? And which crop is going to help compensate for the cost of water and help me make my livelihood as well? So that is a difference in terms of perennial crop and annual crop, the water use and the economic revenue.
And some of those almond trees are watered during the day and their branches are watered. You can see big sprinkler systems going on in the middle of an afternoon, not drip irrigation, but right on the tree. So the question is, California's water is heavily subsidized. That means we're paying for the lion's share of California's water, to transport it, to hold it in reservoirs, to deliver it to farmers. 80% of California water goes to these wealthy, these are not small farmers who own almond orchards. These are sometimes absentee owners or very, very wealthy farmers who are selling the almonds all over the world, not just to low-cost California markets. So does California have to make a decision as to whether or not we allow this kind of free market that is heavily subsidized by taxpayers to continue? Is that a fair thing that we should, allow?
That's a very complicated question. It's difficult.
Why is it complicated? It's a heavy, it's a big investment, making tons of money for a few people. Sue, did you want to say something?
I think maybe this is a bit of a hot button topic for.
Well, that's what we love at Concerned Citizens. That is not part of your bailiwick, I guess, then, right? About the kinds of crops. But I think it's really important for our viewers to understand how much of it is going to almonds and other nuts, not just almonds, but pistachios also. And then what is going to fruits and vegetables. And what, as an avocado lover, what I was sad to see is that some avocados have been taken out of production. I guess they're kind of water hungry also.
Right.
They are?
Yeah. Yes, I do want to clarify something though.
Go ahead.
In terms of, I said it was a complicated topic just because what is the cost of water? And that's a question that I always ask myself. What is a reasonable cost of water?
Right.
And is it the same throughout the valley? Is it the same for a domestic user or a grower? So that's why I said it was complicated. In terms of the future of water in California, I think that we're starting to see a little bit more of a movement toward understanding that sometimes we can't grow or dedicate our water use to these lucrative perennial crops. And a lot of them, you'd mention it, a lot of them are being exported around the world. So then there's this question of, do we use very limited water for California and export it, or do we keep it here in California and grow foods for our community members, for us and the nation? And do we dedicate some part to exporting water? So it all goes back to
That's
this
it.
virtual water.
You're absolutely
Yeah.
right. We are exporting our water. That's an interesting way to look at it, and it's absolutely exporting our subsidized water. So it's a really critical issue. I'm wondering if we have to go back to the grape boycott that we did back in the 60s and 70s in order to put pressure, on farmers, on farm owners, to do the right thing, to give us the kinds of crop mixtures that best serve California's needs. Sue, how much time have we got left here?
About 7 minutes.
7 minutes.
Uh-huh.
Would you like to kind of conclude, Vicky, with making sure we understand what it is that obviously that you want us to understand, and that how we can best help, especially these underserved populations that you so really beautifully described to us?
Sure. I would love to really emphasize that SGMA is a tool, or the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act is a tool for addressing groundwater overdraft, which is an issue that is very prominent here in California. And without groundwater and without surface water, we cannot grow food. We don't have drinking water. There's very limited amount of water for the environment and critical species for the area. Especially up north through that Pacific Flyway, there are critical wetland areas that migratory birds rely on, as well as salmon and the Delta smelt and so many other species. So it's all really a balance of water management. And how can land use or land use transitions help address this groundwater overdraft issue, as well as water scarcity, in a way that is helping our community members that many of them rely on agriculture, but also for food security. I mean, we can't talk about water without talking about food or energy, or food and water and energy altogether. So everything is connected. So really finding a balance and learning to manage our water is very critical for California in the future.
Well said. So we could certainly do without lots of green lawns. And one one item I forgot to bring up, and it's so important, especially for indigenous peoples, and that is the salmon. The Sacramento River is a spawning ground for salmon. And I think some of the worries because of the draw on the Delta is that the smelt are at historically low levels, and some even worry that they may go extinct. And in terms of flyways, I'm not sure a lot of our viewers know, we used to go to this wonderful wetlands area called Grizzly. And it was a seasonal flyway for all sorts of Canadian species of birds. It's just wonderful to watch them there. Beautiful wetland right around Rio Vista and other small towns like that. So that's kind of home for me. It's a very sensitive spot for me. So I'm so glad you talked to us about it and helped us understand what's happening now in the legislature, some hopeful things, some progressive ideas that are long needed, and hopefully we'll begin to address our water issues in this, my most beautiful state of California. So thank you so much, Vicky, and all the good work that you're doing. We appreciate it. Back to you, Sue.
Well, concerned citizens, thanks Vicky Espinoza for sharing her expertise with us. And thanks Barbara Siri for helping Vicky communicate her vision. Vicky's goals are both laudable and ambitious. We wish her every success in achieving them. Concerned Citizens of Laguna Woods is committed to a democracy in which all voices are heard and an environment in which all living things can thrive. Please join us for another episode of Concerned Citizens Presents next time.